Welcome back to the Blue Door Pub, Thunderdome for another bull with Andy Carlson, Minnesota's 87th best daily podcast, a show about everything and nothing, 5 days a week. Sports adjacent. That's what we're on with, baby. Tell a friend, spread the word. iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, bullshow.co is the website, and like us on Facebook.com. Check out our Facebook page. I did a recent Facebook Live about Josh Gordon and why the Vikings should make a play for him. It's going to be a low-risk, high-reward situation. And, yeah, I understand. Josh Gordon is a bit of a problem child, but it could work out. I got Scott Korzenowski of 1500 ESPN coming in. He's going to be talking a little bit of 1500, a little bit of Wolves, a little bit of Vikings, a little bit of everything. Oh, and I'll even he's a lawyer, so I'm going to poke him about this whole United stuff. Yeah. But before you do, hey, if you want to get around town, just like I did, I had a bunch of meetings today, and I didn't feel like driving because that's kind of a pain in the ass downtown. Yeah, I got around town with Lyft. Bullshow.co/Lyft, LYFT. Download the app. $15 off your first couple of rides. Service the entire Twin Cities metro area. Also up and running in Rochester now. It is fantastic, baby. Hit that up. Bullshow.co/Lyft, LYFT. Download the app, and we're giving you $15. What can go wrong? All right, Scott Korzenowski, let's go. And coming down into the Blue Door Pub Studios, like we said, Scott Korzenowski of Sunday Sports Talk, 1500 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at scorzo60. Now,
yes.
What's the 60 for?
That's the year I was born. I'm 50. I've thought for a year that I'm 57, but I do not turn 57 for another month. So I'm 56.
Oh, so you have a full year before you hit the dreaded 57 to live it up.
Yes, it's exactly right.
Like Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson in The Bucket List.
Yeah, but I'm not a bucket list guy, and I'm also not a goal guy. I'm a live guy.
Oh, wait. So it's,
every day I'm living my bucket list.
It's more esoteric than the Vince Vaughn's character from Dodgeball. It's like, if you don't have a goal, you'll never be disappointed. I tell you, it feels phenomenal.
It is. To me, I'm more about people. I've always said this, and I really mean it. I've never had a bad day. And the reason I've never had a bad day is because even bad days are days from which you can learn things. When I look back on my life, some of my favorite days were bad days. So I just have every day is a good day, even days when bad things happen.
Scott always pops some champagne at 9/11. That might be a little too far.
All
right, so, but I got the pronunciation right. Korzenowski.
Korzenowski.
There's
not an extra K in there. It's not an extra K in there.
Now, growing up, did teachers have trouble pronouncing the name?
Well,
it's not as bad as Krzyzewski.
No, not nearly as bad as Krzyzewski. No, but I had major problems spelling it.
Oh.
So, I mean, I wasn't able to spell it until well after all my classmates could spell their last names. Like, your last name's pretty easy.
Yeah.
But I had trouble spelling it. But, no, they would usually get it after the
your
first
friend,
day.
David Lee, it's like, oh, you son of a bitch. All right, so, yeah, why don't we start there? Rewind it back. Like, what's been the journey in radio, in law, in journalism, et cetera?
Well, my journey is that if my mom was very instrumental in my life, because when I was young and there were things I would complain about, and I'd say, do something about it, and she goes, if you don't like something, change it. My mom always said that. She wouldn't let me complain about stuff. She would say, if you don't like it, do something about it. So when I started my college career, when I was in college, my dad was a CPA, and I was in business school. And I switched, and I got into the business school at the University of Minnesota before it was called Carlson. And I was an accounting major, and going into my senior year, I read a column by Joel Bierig in the Star Tribune. Actually, it was the Minneapolis Star at that time before they merged. And he talked about how much he loved being a sports writer. And my father was a huge sports fan, and I had become a huge sports fan. Some of my best memories, the first time my dad took me to Met Stadium, the first time he took me to Williams Arena, the first time he took me to Met Center. I can remember all those like they were yesterday. And I loved sports, and my dad would have loved talk radio now, because my dad was, as soon as something went wrong, he was fire him, In fact, Ron Yeri, the Hall of Fame left tackle of the Vikings, growing up, I would have thought, all I ever heard my dad say was, Jesus Christ, Yeri, because he would always be holding. So
you treated him like Matt Khalil.
Exactly. So when I decided to become a sports writer, I went and talked to my mom, and I said, Mom, Dad's going to be disappointed because I'm following in his footsteps. My father was a chief financial officer, CPA, and then he left and opened his own restaurant later in life. But I said, I'm going to tell him. When I told my dad, he almost teared up. He says, I wished I would have done that. So I became a sports writer and then did that for a number of years.
See, I thought he was being welling up because he knew what the paycheck was going to be.
No, he didn't. He knew when I was out of the house, he wasn't paying my paycheck.
Yeah.
I did go to college an extra year, however, and my father paid for my college, but he says, I ain't paying for your fifth year. So you got to pay for it. So I took out $10,000 in loans, and tuition was about $2,500.
Yep.
And I blew through that $10,000 faster. I was taking my friends out for steaks. I was driving down to Chicago with a girlfriend I had there and taking her. I went through $10,000 in 2 semesters, about $7,500 in 1982. Wow. I was living at large.
Now, was that like Miami Vice era?
No, that was before that.
Oh, dang.
I wasn't Miami Vice, no.
Okay. But you're living large.
I was living large.
Yeah.
I was living large. And then I had to pay that back when I became a sports writer, making $13,000 a year my first year. So it was a little stressful at that point.
Now, lifestyle change from a fifth-year senior to a first-year sports writer, I'm guessing.
Well, the funny thing was where I worked right out of when I was in journalism school, and I went to the U with Jerry Zgoda, who has been at the Star Tribune forever. And Jerry was the superstar. Jerry had decided he was going to become a sports writer early in his career. He had worked at the Boston Herald on an internship. He'd worked at some other fancy paper. He gets out of the Daily, and he gets hired by the Star Tribune and covering the North Stars, I think right out of the blocks or something like that. And Jerry's been there ever since.
Yeah.
And not me. I decided to go late. I had 1 year at the Daily where I, covered some stuff, covered girls swimming, men's baseball. I did cover Gopher basketball the last year. But I didn't have the resume Jerry did, so I started working in Moline, Illinois, making $13,000 a year, typing in bowling scores and covering high school sports.
Which is a third of the Quad Cities.
It is.
In terms of awesomeness.
Yeah, you get. It is, right. What would you say is the most awesome?
That was a joke. I don't even know what it is.
Well, you got Moline.
Okay.
Well, it was a debate. There's actually 6 cities. There's Moline, East Moline, Davenport, Bettendorf, and Rock Island. But a lot of people don't count East Moline.
Oh.
And Silvis, too.
I'd say Davenport's got to be one, probably.
Yeah, in fact, in my basement, I have a picture of the John O'Donnell Stadium where the California Angels, at that time, Class A team played. Beautiful little stadium, always flooded in the spring. And my favorite memory there was I was in the locker room when Chuck Finley was a Class A pitcher.
Oh, that's a blast from the past.
And he got called up the day I was in the clubhouse, which was about the size of these 3 tables. And it was a dump of dumps. And Chuck Finley got called up. And so later, when Tawny Katane is kicking him in the car and he's calling the cops because he was smart enough not to hit her back, he got called up for the stretch drive because they needed a left-hander out of the bullpen. Chuck Finley never went back to the minors. And Chuck Finley won like 250 games and is a borderline Hall of Famer. Never made it, but he was a heck of a pitcher for 16 years. So I always had this connection to. Never saw him again, but I remember that day in that little crappy locker room. And that's what I learned being a sports writer. You can be in the worst places. And some of the times when I was doing stories that I thought were going to be the worst stories, and they would turn into some of the best stories and some of my best memories. That was one of them. Go over to the Quad City Angels and do a column in the middle of summer because there's nothing else to write on. You don't figure that's going to be really that good of a day. But it turned out to be a great day when you see Chuck Finley getting called up right from the clubhouse when you're sitting right next to him. It was kind of cool.
Now, you mentioned that covering spring training was the worst.
Yeah, so I worked in the Quad Cities, and then I got hired at the Fort Myers News Press. And the interesting thing about that was I was trying to get jobs. I would send out 20, 30, 40 letters a week. No, nothing. Oh, blah, blah, blah.
That was expensive back then. You had to pay for postage.
Oh, I had to pay for postage. I had to finding the address is not as easy as it was today. Being a sports writer back in those days, when you would want to get somebody's batting average, that would be a 3-hour ordeal. Where's the media guide from the California Angels from 5 years ago? You'd call the Angel PR guy up. You couldn't go on the internet. And you'd send out all these letters. But there was an opening for a sports columnist job in Fort Myers, Florida. And I was getting frustrated. I thought, I'll never get this job. I mean, why am I going to get a sports columnist job? The Fort Myers News Press was a paper of about 150,000 circulation, 100,000 circulation. Moline had 13,000. I wasn't getting looked at by anybody. And I wrote my cover letter as though it was a reader of my columns. And I wrote it to the sports editor named Dick Schneider, and it said, Mr. Schneider, do not hire this guy. He's opinionated. He's just ripping myself. And Dick read it and flew me down for an interview, and I got the job.
Wow.
So it's funny how that stuff works.
Yeah, I suppose it did stand out from the rest of the cover letters.
It did. And
I truly have a passion for journalism.
Yeah, it is. It's right. I did. I still, just to morph a little bit here, the little, and I don't want to get into politics, but I always would, but whether you like, and this isn't even a positive Trump or an anti-Trump, but everybody saw on the internet where Ted Koppel just was talking to Sean Hannity.
Yeah.
Did you see that in Sean Hannity?
Yeah.
And Sean Hannity goes, Ted, do you think I'm bad for America? And he goes, yes. He just said yes. And he said, why? Because you put your idealism, and I'm not using the right word, in front of facts. And I mean, to me, and people can take what they want with it, but the fact that journalism really seems to be dying, it saddens me, because I saw another story in the paper today that talks about Fox ratings are huge and MSNBC's are up, and meanwhile, the regular news channels that are trying to be journalists, their ratings are, that's not what people want anymore.
Divisiveness sells. Like if you bring it down to a micro level in sports, Sean Hannity is basically Skip Bayless.
Yes.
Yeah. Like hot takes and polarized, and there's no room in no man's land. It's like a World War I battle now in both political media and in sports.
And honestly, if you said to me, Scott, go be Skip Bayless and I'll pay you $5 million, I would not do it.
Oh.
I would not do it. I could not.
What about 10?
Do it. Then I do it.
Yeah, because people rail against Skip Bayless a lot. Like, honestly, he probably has like 80-20 negative to positive.
Right.
Like there's no like hardcore fervent Skip Bayless supporters, right? And people criticize him, Coward to a degree, Clay Travis coming up, but they're all getting paid.
Well, and I think I put Coward in a different genre. I really like Coward. Well, when he was on ESPN, I've not seen him once since he's been on Fox. But I liked his show. I liked the way he would think of some things. Bayless was an old newspaper writer. He was an old columnist in Dallas.
He was great in Dallas.
And, that he made his mark doing that, that's fine. I mean, I don't think he's a bad person. I mean, I wouldn't. It just, for me, I think to be good at radio or be as a lawyer or anything, you got to be true to yourself. And it doesn't mean the way I do it is right. But that must be, some of that must be in Skip Bayless. But in fact, it was funny. I had said something on my Sunday show, and Jonathan Harrison said, hot take. And I said, Jonathan, I pride myself on not doing hot takes. And the reason is that I think a hot take is something you put out there without really thinking about it to get a reaction. I don't say stuff to get a reaction. I say stuff, and people may perceive it as a hot take, but it's something that I've thought about. And this is my opinion based on what I thought about, and I give you my opinion.
Well, let's dig into one of the hot takes you gave me earlier, that the Wolves will not make the playoffs with Tom Thibodeau as their head coach.
Yeah, and that may be a little hyperbole, but I say it to make a point. And I saw it in Game 2 this year. After the first 2 games of the season, I saw something very wrong with this team, that Thibodeau is not the right guy. And I said it after 2 games. I was going crazy on my show, and people said, give him time, give him time, give him time. I love that, give him time. I think that's an overused phrase in sports. Did the Spurs need time to completely rebuild? They've just completely rebuilt. They're the same team now that they were when they had David Robinson here. Yeah. And all people have changed, and they're the same team.
Kawhi's a stud.
And he is a stud. And the reason that they're the same team, though, is because the guy in charge, Greg Popovich, and look at the Spurs. They signed Pau Gasol, who's old but good. They signed LaMarcus Aldridge, who's good. And they made a great draft pick with Kawhi. They spotted Kawhi when nobody else did because he was the 15th pick. And they turned him, and they helped turn him into a good player. Look at the rest of that roster. You got, you have Tony Parker, who was a late first-round pick and was a great player, but not anymore. Manu Ginobili was a late first-round pick, was a great player, not anymore. And you got a bunch of cast-offs. But Popovich knows what he wants, and he gets the people in there that will do it. And if Popovich coached the Wolves, the first move he would make would be to get rid of Andrew Wiggins. I am convinced 100%.
So roll with Cat, roll with Levine.
And Cat I'm disappointed in, too, significantly. Especially, Cat has stopped playing defense. And to me, you can see that Cat has almost no respect for Thibodeau. To me, you can just see it the way he plays. He doesn't play with... Offensively, Cat is better now than KG ever was. He's a phenomenal offensive player. I mean, he's approaching a top 5 or 6 offensive player in the league, and he should be
overall or post player.
Overall.
Wow.
Overall, if they had a coach who knew how to get him, I mean, his effective shooting percentage in the last 2 months is 63%. He's averaging 28 points a game. He's hitting 85% from the line. He's hitting 40% from 3. He's a great passer. If you can put the ball, if they ran the offense through him, he'd be even better. But defensively, and he has had good defense. He can be a good. He'll never be KG. Let's face it. Defensively,
he's too polite.
But now you just see him not even caring anymore. It's like, screw it. I'm going to get my points. You can just see this team is.
He's Kevin Loving it.
Yeah, he really is. And that saddens me because I think Towns has far better competitive instincts. I just don't think Wiggins has any real competitive instincts. And people say that to me, and they say, oh, you hate. I said, I don't hate Andrew Wiggins. I don't know Andrew Wiggins. I think Andrew Wiggins is probably a really nice kid.
Yep.
Andrew Wiggins just goes and plays ball. He just goes and plays ball. That's all. He doesn't play basketball to win. He just plays ball. And he's going to get a max contract, and he plays ball. You don't win games just playing ball.
Do you think he's just a great natural talent, maybe a little ambivalent to it? His true passion is probably video games or something like that. And he doesn't have this, I need to win or I will die instinct like a Kobe had, like a Jordan obviously had.
A KG had.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of guys like that. The guys that I've seen back in my early sports writing days, the guy I saw like that, and he became one of my favorite players, was I was covering the Bucks, Tampa Bay Bucks, when Vinny Testaverde was the first pick. And Vinny really struggled in Tampa Bay, and Vinny kind of had a star-crossed career. And later he kind of latched on to Bill Parcells, and Parcells used him, and he kind of resurrected his career. But Vinny was a guy who, when he was on the Bucks, I loved him as a person. All he would talk about to me was about painting. He wanted to paint. Vinny was not a competitive person. Vinny was a remarkable, as gifted a quarterback as has ever played in the NFL, physically. And Vinny tried. It didn't mean that he didn't try. I think Wiggins tries, and you see the difference. The difference is it just wasn't the most important thing to him like it was. And if it's not the most important thing to you, you're not going to be great in the cutthroat world of professional sports. You're just not going to be.
Now, just thinking through the roster, is there anyone on the Wolves who does have that I need to win or I will die mentality?
Ricky does.
Okay.
Ricky does.
Elder statesman.
Yeah, and Ricky's always had it, though. I mean, Ricky has had it from day one. Ricky's got it. He's got other problems in his game, but he's got it. And the rest of those guys, I think Cat's got it. I've seen Cat play like it, but I think Tibbs has beat it out of him. He looks like a beat-down guy.
Well, isn't he leading the league in minutes? Like him and Wiggins are 1 and 2.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah.
It's absurd. And Wiggins just is not. And people say, well, he's young. I say, okay. He's now in his third. He's played 3 years. He's missed like 2 games. He's incredibly durable. So he's played like 240 games. He's played a ton of minutes, right? His whole career. Much to his credit, he shows up to work. He plays, and he's on time. He's a classy kid. He's not. People think, why do you? I don't hate Andrew Wiggins at all. I'm saying if I'm the GM of this team, that's not a guy that can be a cornerstone of my team. And so the fact about Wiggins is you look at his 4 years and you look at the advanced stats and adjusted for minutes, he's the same guy today that he was the first day he played. He isn't getting better. He is not getting better. So this is who he is. This is who he will be. And he is essentially a much nicer version of Rudy Gay. So if that's who you want to build your program around, see how it's gone for the teams that have built around Rudy Gay. You don't build your team around guys like Andrew Wiggins. And yet, the 2 guys that Tibbs seems to give the most love to are 2 guys. Is one guy, Wiggs, who's great talent, but doesn't have this desire, and Chris Dunn, who can't play.
Oh, God.
He can't dribble, and he can't pass, and he can't shoot.
You play defense. That's about it.
Plays defense, but they want him to be a point guard, and he can't dribble. I'm a better dribbler than Chris Dunn. Close to it. He's one of the worst dribblers in the league. He's probably, if you took the Timberwolves, he's probably the 8th or 9th best dribbler on that team, and he's going to play your point. Ricky, I've seen Ricky lose his dribble maybe once in 7 years. You'll see Chris Dunn lose his dribble 3 times in the first 3 minutes he's in a game.
Now, would you put Tyus ahead of Dunn in terms of?
I think Tyus would. I love Tyus is another guy that's competitive.
I'll put Tyus' younger brother ahead of Dunn.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love Tyus' younger brother.
Yeah.
And Tyus is a special player. He's got the gift. And it really concerns me that Tibbs doesn't play Tyus. Now, he's more lately with the injuries. He's played him. He doesn't play him, and when he plays him, their winning percentage when Tyus plays 10-plus minutes is over 500. Now, it's probably sunk in the last couple of games because he's playing more, and you can have small sample sizes, but Tyus to me, Tyus is an above-average starting point guard in this league. No question. And I think Tyus could be an all-star someday. And someday, I believe, Tyus will be the point guard that will replace Tony Parker. And when he's leading the Spurs, to championships, people are going to go, why did we let him go? Tyus is a special player.
Now, with such a microwave, not crockpot sports culture, I feel like the NBA can be the most frustrating because you're bringing in these 19-year-old kids who have only 1 year of seasoning, and they're really not going to be men or ready for NBA for 4 to 5. Like, Cat's an anomaly. Probably 4 to 5 years. That's already past a rookie contract. They go somewhere else, blow up, and then fan bases are like, why don't we hang on to this guy? Why wasn't he developed here? Well, that's because he's not ready.
Yeah, no, it's some guys, but to me, one, you look at Levine and Wiggins are a great study. When Levine came in, he was not any good from his basketball standpoint. He didn't even start at UCLA.
Yep.
But you look at his growth from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, it's remarkable. The numbers show it. Defensively, not so much. Offensively, he went from like an 86 offensive rating to like 114 offensive rating. Remarkable. Dunn is at an 85 offensive rating, and I don't see him getting better. But you look at Wiggins, he's the same guy. Towns has gotten better, not necessarily defensively, but better offense. So if you gave me my choice between Levine and Wiggins, it's a no-brainer. I'd take Levine all day, every day, twice on Sunday. And I'm not saying Levine's going to be better, but I see a competitiveness in Levine. I see an understanding of the game developing in Levine. All I see in Wiggins is that if you were going to the park and going to do a one-on-one tournament, I would pick Wiggins. But playing with 4 other guys and playing like a championship player, I see none of it. But I just don't see it. You see spurts of it, but you don't see very much.
Wiggins will kick some ass in Ice Cube's 3-on-3 league.
He will. But people are so in love with Wiggins. They think Wiggins, Levine, and Towns are Harden, Westbrook, and Durant. The only guy that's in the conversation with Durant, Westbrook, and Harden is Cat. It's not Levine. But I see Levine getting better, and I think Levine could be a really good player on a good team. And so with Tibbs not knowing what he's doing, in my opinion, and him giving the ball to Wiggins time after time after time late in games, and they just keep losing late in games, that is a lethal combination that has played itself out this year.
If you could have your choice of getting rid of either Wiggins or Tibbs, which would you pick?
I'd get rid of Tibbs.
Tibbs?
In a heartbeat. Again,
I guess you could trade Wiggins for something.
Yeah, I don't know Tibbs, but it's not working. I mean, either he knows what he's doing and he can't communicate it to his players, or he doesn't know what he's doing. I don't know which is worse, but they've quit on him now. They've stopped playing defense, and it's really frustrating to me that to me the modern day coach is Steve Kerr or Stevens. That these guys, I mean, look at that. Would anybody take the Celtics roster? Forget all the draft picks they have in the cash. Would anybody take the Celtics roster over the Wolves roster that's looking from the outside? No. And Brad Stevens has them at, they're going to be the number 1 seed in the East. Not that they'll beat the Cavs. I don't think they will. But he's built that into a great team. And I saw it his first year. They were playing at Target Center. I was at the game. And the Wolves were up 18 with like 5 minutes to go. And the Celtics just started chipping away. And the Wolves were up like 2. It had gone down to 2, and they had the last possession. And the Celtics ran an unbelievably perfect play. And you just watch Stevens just orchestrating. The guy missed the shot, and the Wolves won. But you watch that, and I remember looking at my buddy, Hoops Maven, and I said, Brad Stevens is a serious coach. He's a modern coach.
Do you think Tibbs just doesn't have it strategic-wise? Is he a little bit too ham-fisted, a little bit too much of a mule driver?
Well, I think that's part of it. I think Tibbs understands basketball. I don't mean to say that I like to think that in a certain way I'm kind of like the Republican Party now, and this is ripping myself.
Yep.
The Republican Party sat there for 7 years ripping Obamacare, and then they said, wait till we get in charge, and then they got in charge, and they looked at it and go, whoa, this is kind of complicated, right? So I'm sure if you handed the Wolves reins to me, I'd look at it and go, maybe this is more complicated than I think. So it's easy to shoot from the outside. And obviously Tibbs
probably
knows.
Hire Dan Munson.
I would.
You really Munsoned it.
I would get somebody who's a really good offensive guy, and I'd get somebody who's a really good defensive guy, and then I would say, when you're playing the Lakers and you're up 8 with 2 minutes to go, you might want to throw the ball to Karl Anthony Towns every now and again.
Yeah, the giving up of the double-digit leads and the collapses in the third and fourth quarter, it's like a couple times, fine. More than that, it's a trend.
It's a trend.
It's disquieting.
It's a trend because it's an old cliche. Doing the same thing and expecting the different result is the absolute definition of insanity.
Yeah.
At the end of games, he just continues to give the ball to Wiggins. Go ahead. And Andrew Wiggins' favorite move is take 3 dribbles and take a fall away 18-footer inside the three-point arc with a hand in his face. And because he's so good, because he's so good, he doesn't miss them all, right? He hits 28% of them.
Yeah.
But he doesn't understand how to play. And how often do you see Wiggins being posted up or being on weak side action, cutting to the basket where he's devastating, going to the basket? He's one of the elite players in the NBA at finishing around the rim. His Euro step is as good as Harden's. He's got some great aspects to his game, especially around the rim. He's phenomenal at it. He's a great athlete. He's got great ability. But one of his strengths is not giving him the ball at the top of the key and saying create. He's not very good at that. And Tibbs does it over and I mean, they're leading the Lakers in a meaningless game. I get it. They're up 108-100 with 2 minutes to go in the game. They get outscored 31-11 after that. And in the 5 minutes of overtime and the last 2.5 minutes of the game, Karl Anthony Towns got the ball in the low post 0 times.
Wow.
And the Lakers are playing 4 guards and Julius Randle, who I could score over. So, Julius Randle could never guard Karl Anthony Towns, ever. Karl Anthony Towns would score on him 4 out of 5 possessions. It just would. And if they had to double, he'd kick it out, you'd rotate it, and now you got Wiggins coming in. Tibbs's mind block about thinking that the future of this team is Wiggins and Chris Dunn is what frightens me. That's what frightens me.
Were Towns and Randall at Kentucky at the same time?
I don't think so.
It's hard to tell with all the one and done.
It is. I don't know. Did Julius Randle stay there 1 year? Because he came out the year before. Yeah, I don't think so. And Julius Randle, I like him, but can he guard Towns? I don't think so.
You know what's kind of sad to me is I was a big college basketball fan growing up, and mainly because the names would stick with you. Like, I like Duke, I like Carolina's, like Antoine Jamison, Shane Battier, Ed Cota, Maktar Njai. Like, you get to know these friggin' guys. But now with all the one-and-dones, I don't know a single person in this tournament. Like, no, it's crazy to think Wiggins would be a senior at Kansas.
No, and you heard the stat that the Phoenix Suns starting lineup with 7 of the 8 Elite 8 teams at older starting lineups than Phoenix Suns. But what's happened, and I think that college basketball this year has found its legs.
Yep.
And by that I mean the cool thing you see with the one and done, that obviously Kentucky's, we were talking how many one and dones are there? 10, 12, 14 a year? They're all on Kentucky, Duke, Kansas, UCLA. That's about it. A few others here or there. Ben Simmons at LSU last year. There's a few of them that pop up at other schools, but those are them. And what's happened is you're seeing the teams that are the old style teams, which is pretty much everybody but them, that has to have. Oregon has a lot of experienced players.
Yep.
South Carolina's got a lot of experienced players. Gonzaga is got some one and dones, but they're more experienced. You're seeing, to me, the bottom end of the 1-16 matchup. I hate that. I would have everybody in the tournament play 1 week and get it down to 64, and then pick the teams. And you'd have then the number 1 team like in the country, instead of playing Southwest Texas State, would be playing Iowa, and you'd have some good 1-16 games. Okay, that's what I want to see. But take the first week out of it. The difference between the blue blood programs and the good programs like the Gophers might be trending toward, or South Carolina, those types of teams, has the gap has reduced because the blue bloods still have the talent they always had, but now their talent is all freshmen.
Yeah.
And they're playing against very experienced teams, and you're seeing some really interesting games. Like you saw Kansas get taken down, by a team that had more experience,
which is always delicious.
It is always delicious.
Yeah. It's like Bill Self didn't have Mario Chalmers for that one YOLO shot. His legacy would be a lot different.
Yeah, it is, and but some of that is, I think, people always want to. First, I'm a huge Calipari guy.
Yeah,
I love Calipari. People say, "Geez, he's had all these great players in the last 8 years." He's won 1 championship. Yeah, he's been to 3 Final Fours and 7 Elite Eights.
Yeah.
And I was talking today to Hoops Maven, one of my friends who's a huge Duke fan.
Yep.
And he brought up that Duke won the national title when they had 3 freshmen playing for them. Okafor and Tyus and Okafor, Tyus and Winslow. But they did have Tyus, who was never really a freshman. Tyus hasn't been a freshman since he was about 8 years old. Okay, he knows how to play. But I said, when you've got 3 freshmen out there and you watch the game against Carolina, and Carolina has like 1 freshman out there, I think that doesn't mean Kentucky couldn't have beat them. I mean, they had tied the game with 8 seconds to go. It's just that I'm not going to downgrade Calipari for that. That he can't win a championship every year at the freshman. Where Self had a lot more experience. He did have, the superstar forward on his team that's the freshman, but he had a lot of experience on that team.
I think the greatest achievement for Calipari was like, hey, Derrick Rose, why don't you come down to Western Tennessee? Just come on, hang out for a year. Be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about homework. We got you.
Exactly. He gets those guys, no question.
All right, so we just had some Blue Door deliciousness show up, so we'll take a little break here. And, hey, I'm telling you, you listen, you got plans on Friday, Blue Door Pub, get down here for the fish fry. All you can eat cod, $12 and plus $14 pictures of Indeed B-Side Pilsner. Get them both, get entered into a drawing. You don't got plans on Friday? You do now. Get down to Longfellow or University on Como or visit thebdp.com for all the details. All right, be right back with more Corzo with Bull on the Tuesday. I got a fever, and the only prescription is more Purple for the Win podcast with Andy Carlson. Come to you all off season long, covering free agency, the draft, OTAs, and then we're on to training camp. Get the show on 1500 ESPN, Podcast One, and the Podcast One app. And coming back into the Blue Door Pub Thunderdome, sitting my man Scott Corzo, and still shooting the breeze. Like, that was probably the longest break that I've had doing these interview shows.
Yeah,
But you are quite the raconteur.
I'm a raconteur, and I somebody once said to me that you really love to hear yourself talk, and they said you don't know the half of it because I hear myself talk even when I'm not talking. So it never in my brain this is always going on.
Well, except you hear yourself through like the bones in your jaw.
Yeah.
So maybe it sounds different, more than just tone or inflection, than it does to other people. I've gotten that a lot too.
Yeah.
My wife says I talk too much.
Now people say that I do sound a lot like Judd on the radio, which I think is true.
Oh.
Isn't that true?
I had that written down somewhere. I was going to bring that up because I have 2 really like bullshit talents that have no bearing at all, like in a free market. Like maybe I could work for the FBI. I'm good with syncing up faces. Like I'll see a face on TV and then I'll bug the wife and be like, that guy's been in like 7 different movies.
That's one of my strengths.
Yeah.
Yep.
And also voice doppelgangers. And I was going to bring up you and Judd sound very similar on radio.
I'll tell you one of my skills, and you need it less now with watching everything on demand. But when I'm watching 2 things, sensing how long the commercial break is on the other and getting back almost right on the number. It's just a natural. It's a natural skill that I have.
That's like,
and it's going out of the style now. Like everybody watches everything on demand.
That's like the guy who broke, was it No Whammies game?
Yes.
Oh, press your luck. Yeah, the guy like timed it from watching it, and then he won a lot of money, and then they threw him off. Yeah. But I wanted to come back, and we didn't quite capture how you went from sports journalist to lawyer.
Yes.
To part-time sports doctor.
Yeah, and I was a sports writer, and I was in Fort Myers, and then I went to Moline. I told the story, when Moline went to Fort Myers and was a sports columnist there, and it was great. And, but when I was in Moline, the story that we were talking about before the podcast, when I realized at that point, I was still a young sports writer because I was only in Moline like 2.5 years, and I ended up being a sports writer about 7. So this was about the 2-year mark, and I was in Moline, and I had nothing to write about, and on my own dime, I drove to the Chicago for the Western Open, a PGA Tour event that was being played at Butler National. And I decided I was going to do a story on Seve Ballesteros. And so Seve gets done playing, and I was there with a longtime sports writer for the Chicago Sun-Times, Ray Sons. And at this time, I'm like 26 years old, and I look at Ray Sons, and I think he's like 90, right? He was probably my age now. He's probably 60. But he had gray hair, and I knew him. He was this very nice sports columnist, very nice to me. And we were both going to do a story on Seve. So we both introduced ourselves to Seve, and we said, Seve, we'd like to talk to you. And Seve goes, I have to practice. We said, okay. So he goes to the practice range with his brother. Seve hits balls on the range for an hour and a half. That's fine. That's, they have to do their work, right? That would never upset me. He's at the tournament. He's a professional. But he sees Ray Sons and me sitting there. And and we're waiting to talk to him. And we wait an hour and a half, which is aggravating for both of us, but we both understand. So he gets done, and we thought he'd come over and say, come to the locker room with me. And he goes, I got to go. But you can talk to me on my way to the car. So we talked to him for
nice
about
of you, my liege.
Yeah, so we talked to him for about 5 minutes, and there I am scrambling to write down his quotes. And there's Ray Sons, who I envisioned to be about 60. And he's scrambling doing it. I remember that day I thought, I'm 25. I'm working at the Moline Daily Dispatch. This is one of the best players in the world. He's treating me like crap. I can live with it. But when I'm 60 and I got some 32-year-old punk, even if he's a golfer, treating me like crap, that wouldn't sit well with me. And that day I knew I would not be a sports writer when I was an old guy.
You looked at the older sports writer and you're like, I don't want your life.
No, I do not. And that was always my least favorite part. Why I really like doing talk radio is because you don't have to go in and talk to the athletes. Some of them, you would come into some occasions where they were really insightful and nice. But 91, a lot of them are just difficult to deal with. And 95% of them don't say anything that's interesting. They just don't. And the time that they give you some morsel of something that's interesting, it's about 20 hours to get to that one morsel. It just isn't that interesting. And you look at a guy like Bill Simmons, kind of transformed sports writing in a lot of ways, where he would write great sports articles and never talk to any athletes. Because you know why? They're boring.
They are boring.
They are boring. Yeah. They don't want to say anything.
Yeah, coaches and most coaches and most players, they're very cookie cutter cliche. Don't really say anything, stick to the talking points, and you don't really get much out of them.
No, you don't. And in fact, I remember back in the days, Dan Marino, who was one of my all-time favorite athletes, loved covering him. And all the writers loved Dan Marino. But we never talked to him because he would purposely say boring cliches because he didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But he was very nice to us. And so at the end of games, we'd all go to other players. I had an offensive lineman named Larry Foster who was brilliant. He would always give me a good quote.
It's always the secondary and tertiary.
It is, and he was a good player.
Yeah.
And he caught a touchdown pass in a game, and everyone in the press box, he goes, "You're a guy." I'm standing up going, "Yes, Larry caught a touchdown pass where they put him at left tackle eligible in the playoff game." But we'd go at the end of the game, and we'd get because the editor wanted a quote from Marino, and we'd go at the end, we'd all swing by his locker, he'd give us some boring quote, and we put it in the article.
Role playing. You play you. I'll play Dan Marino after the game. So try and interview me.
Dan, there was a time on the sidelines where it appeared you were yelling at Mark Duper about a play. Do you remember that play?
Well, me and Duper are both very competitive, and we're both just trying to help the team win. And sometimes guys don't see eye to eye, but we worked it out, and we got to win today.
That's about right. But I will tell you a great story. There was a time when he had the two receivers, Mark Clayton and Mark Duper. And I don't know if you remember those guys, Clayton and Duper, back in the day. And Mark Clayton was borderline criminal, but was super smart. Mark Duper, I think, and I'm not joking, I think he had like an 80 IQ. He was really dumb. And Mark Clayton protected Mark Duper. He was like his little brother, and he protected. And they were both great players. And after one game, Mark Clayton and Marino were going at it on the sidelines. And of course, we go ask Dan about it. And he says, "I don't know what." And we asked Mark Clayton. He says, "What was going on the sidelines?" "I don't know what you're talking about." And nobody yelled at Mark Clayton. But when Dan Marino yelled at Mark Clayton kept his mouth shut. I mean, Dan Marino was the man. Mark Clayton knew, one, he's my quarterback, or I'm not going to get any passes, and two, I'm not standing up. He goes, "We weren't yelling. They just denied it flat out." It was funny.
Now, if that was Jay Fiedler,
it
Mark would have thrown him under the bus pretty hard.
Would have punched him, yeah. And by the way, can you swear on the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because anytime we'd go up and ask Mark Duper about Don Shula, he said, "You mean the fucking old man?" That's all he ever said. The fucking old man. That's what he referred to his coach as.
Yep.
And we all knew that as soon as Mark Clayton was no longer an elite quarterback, receiver, he would be cut because Shula hated him as much. And as soon as Mark Clayton was no longer amongst the top 5 or 6 receivers, he was cut.
It's funny you mentioned that because that happened recently here in Minnesota. Adrian Peterson, precipitous fall from grace and possibly starting in 2014. Option wasn't picked up. Just simply isn't what he used to be. And also with the league changing, there's no room for a two-down tyrant back that makes the team run from I formation.
No. And, in fact, I've often said, look, I grew up in the era of Chuck Foreman as a kid.
Chuck.
But Chuck was a phenomenal receiver, a phenomenal blocker. When I was covering the Dolphins, I watched Thurman Thomas destroy the Dolphins. Thurman Thomas, maybe the best pass catcher as a running back I've ever seen. He was a very good running back. And by the way, this has nothing to do with me liking him personally because he was an asshole
Yep.
of the epic proportion. And I always used to say about Thurman Thomas, he's on a great team. He's making a lot of money. He's playing the game. Why is he so mad all the time? He's living the dream, man.
Yeah.
He's even talked about that later, that he doesn't understand why he was that way. But as a player, he was as if he would have played receiver, he would have been a top 10 receiver in the league. And he was a top 5 runner in the league. It was an amazing. So to me, if you say who's the best running back that ever played, it's Thurman Thomas. Not even close.
He's probably mad about giving up snaps to sophomore Barry Sanders.
Yeah, that's right. And Thurman. So I like those kind of backs. You know, Marcus Allen, Falk. You know, these guys, the guys that can do everything.
Yep.
So I was never an Adrian Peterson fan. I never respected a guy who couldn't catch passes and refused to block. And people say, well, he couldn't block. Adrian Peterson could have been a devastating blocker if he would have cared about it.
It's like, we're talking about Wiggins
He's
and
like
defense
Wiggins.
earlier. It's like defense is all about want to.
Yes, Wiggins could be one of the top 5 players in the NBA if he actually worked on the aspects of his game. And so Adrian Peterson, I never thought, and I talked about it on my show even when he was in his prime, I said, I like watching Adrian Peterson run.
Yep.
To me, Adrian Peterson is like art. You know, you put it in your house, it doesn't really increase the value of your house. It just is really nice to look at. And if it's a really expensive painting, you just take it with you. So, I mean, that famous season was it 2012 when he had the MVP season. It was fun to watch him, but it doesn't help you win games.
Adrian would be the statue of David, except slightly modified.
That's right, yeah. So I was never a huge Adrian Peterson fan. So to me, to have him on this team, if Adrian Peterson came up to me tomorrow and I was Rick Spielman and he said, I will play for free, I'd say no thanks. Because you need a back that can do all 3 things.
We already got Latavius.
Yeah, Latavius, who's not that great of a pass catcher and not that good of a runner, but he is a good blocker, so they do have that. Yeah. But now Adrian Peterson is sitting there saying, look, I don't know why people aren't signing him. He might be asking for too much money, but Adrian, in a league that now values the pass catcher, pass blocker, see the Super Bowl and James White, you're a dinosaur, and it's your own fault because you never learned to block or catch passes. That's your fault.
Yep. See, the usage of James White in the Super Bowl still leaves me with hope for Jerick McKinnon. Because, Jerick McKinnon is James White. And Jerick McKinnon was drafted 2 rounds ahead of James White. He's a better player. But
you think Jerick McKinnon's a better player than James White?
Absolutely.
No way.
Yeah.
No way.
James White wouldn't have started if Deion Lewis didn't get hurt.
Well, maybe so, but you watch. I've yet to see Jerick McKinnon break a tackle. So send me a tweet the next time you do. And he's not that good of a pass catcher. I mean, to me, people look at pass catching and they say, Adrian Peterson's problem catching the ball wasn't that he couldn't catch the ball. He rarely dropped passes. It is getting your body in a position to where you're moving toward the line of scrimmage, and when the quarterback hits you, you can't. Adrian Peterson could not. You say you can't talk and chew gum at the same time. Adrian Peterson could not run and catch the ball at the same time, and I mean that. He had to stop to catch it. Where you watch now, it's unfair to compare him to Randy Moss, but Randy Moss catching the ball was like nothing to him. It was like breathing. He could be fending guys off, running, and at the last minute, he just stick his hand up.
Stick one mid up.
Yeah, and just catching the ball was no factor for Randy Moss. That's why he was so good. He could worry about everything else, and at the last minute go, I'll catch the ball now. Right? Adrian Peterson was the other way. He has to drop everything to catch the ball.
Let me explain to you my theory about Adrian Peterson as a receiver. Now, I've said this a bunch on the various shows, so listeners, if you heard this one, bear with me. But all right, so Adrian Peterson, ever since he was 6, 7, 8, playing Pop Warner football, football down in Texas, especially East Texas, that's a big time deal. Winning Pop Warner games, that's a point of pride for the coaches. So they're just like, I'm just going to give the ball 28, 40 times.
Absolutely.
43 dive, 44 dive, over and over. It's the same thing at Oklahoma. Bob Stoops, they had shitty quarterbacks the entire time, all except for Jason White, who won a Heisman, didn't deserve it, whatever.
Right.
And Bob Stoops was like, I'm just going to run Adrian to the ground, and we'll just win a lot of games. We won't beat Boise State, but whatever. And then NFL early on, you have Brooks Bollinger and T-Jack, and we'll just hand him the ball. He at no stage did he ever have to learn to be a well-rounded back and be a receiver, be a pass blocker, anything like that. And you can't teach old dogs new tricks. And frankly, if I'm a kid, especially in high school, I'm breaking 4 80-yard runs in a game. It's like, Coach, why are we going to pass it all?
I understand why he got there.
Yeah.
But now he's paying the price.
Yeah.
Because the reason, I mean, why would you go out and sign Marshawn and, they signed Eddie Lacy. You know why? Eddie Lacy was never 1/10 the back Adrian Peterson. But you know what Eddie Lacy can do? He can block and catch passes. Yeah. And Adrian can't. And nobody. And I love the Vikings fans' obsession with Adrian Peterson. Oh, he's going to go to the Packers and win a Super Bowl. I go, let him go. If the Packers win a Super Bowl, it ain't going to be because of Adrian Peterson.
Because of 12.
If he goes to New England, he's going to win I go, it ain't. They win Super Bowls. They don't. I get it. What is this? Look, if you're evaluating the Vikings, who have no offensive line and who only hope is to throw, I would next year, and I'm only partially joking, the Vikings should never run the ball next year. And I will hearken back. I mean, not one play, because you could run these little swings. You don't have to. Yeah. I go back to, remember,
short passes are the new run.
Many years ago, when the Vikings had the Williams Wall, and they were playing a Monday night, and I think the Vikings still might have had Dante, and the Patriots came into the Metrodome on Monday night. And they threw, I think, 18 straight passes to start the game. It's like, oh, you better. It's like Bill Belichick said, why am I going to try to run against that group? And he never did. He just said, screw it, we won't run. I don't care, right? You don't have to run this. Yeah. And to me, so I'm only joking, but the Vikings' running game should be all passing. So they need a running back who can catch passes. Simple as that.
Yeah. And I still hold out hope for McKinnon because, remember the Dallas Thursday game, the touchdown, the guy within 2.
Yep.
Splitting McKinnon out wide, getting a mismatch on Sean Lee, a linebacker. It's like, that's his game. That's what he should be doing more. Hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, all right, so we got to get into Adrian 2014 because you have a different perspective than I.
On Adrian 2014?
Yeah.
You mean the event? I would have played him all year. And to me, I've talked about that a lot, that if a player is not in jail, if he's out.
What if he's out on bail?
Play him. And I'm serious, and I'll tell you why. Because this whole sense that the Vikings suspending Adrian Peterson was somehow helping the underlying problem, the problem that Adrian felt it was right to hit his child with a switch, is a false construct. Adrian, if you really cared about those kids, Adrian's children, the best thing to do for Adrian Peterson would have been to keep him employed and not have him spending all day at home with his kids. My point is this: it's nothing but a PR campaign, and it is based on the fact that people think playing for the Vikings is important. If Adrian Peterson was a grade school teacher and he beat his kid with a switch, I'd say you want to fire him.
Yep.
Adrian Peterson's job is to go on the field and hit other men very hard. There's really, I don't see why somebody who's been charged with a violent crime can't play in the NFL. That is the ultimate violence game. I don't, and the only reason is that people think that he's a role model or he stands for something or the sponsors get upset. You know, I think this perception that the NFL somehow is helping domestic violence by suspending their players is a crock. All they're doing is making it look like they care when they really don't.
Now, does your logic apply to other sports too, NBA, Major League Baseball,
yes,
hockey?
Absolutely. It absolutely does. I don't know why suspending, and to me, the kick I get out of it is when a guy, and they sit there and you'll hear ESPN argue about, is 6 games enough? Yes. Is 4 games enough? If you hit a woman in the face with your hand and the law doesn't put him in jail, what difference is if you suspend him 6 games, 8 games, 12 games, 100 games? To me, aren't we directing our anger at the wrong place? Aren't people concerned that when Joe Mixon decked that woman, he spent 100 hours of community service? Well, what difference does it make whether he plays for the Vikings or not? Joe Mixon is still out in public. He's still around women. So whether you sign him, don't sign him, suspend him, don't suspend him, none of that has anything to do with fixing Joe Mixon or punishing Joe Mixon the way he should have been punished. The NFL's, it's to me fake. It's to make it look like they care when they don't.
Well, adding on that point, because I believe that Adrian should have been suspended for the year. I think the punishment fit the crime, and I do feel that teams civically represent more of the city. And I understand your point to a degree, and I'll tack on that about Josh Brown. But with I don't think the fan outrage moves owners' needle one iota. Like, honestly, if
sponsors does,
I was going to say sponsors. If Radisson hadn't pulled out, and other sponsors of the Vikings hadn't saber rattled, the Wilfs would have played him because they were intent on playing in Week 2 against New England.
And if I was the owner, I would say to Radisson, "See you later." I'm an NFL team. How long till somebody else is going to want their logo behind the coaches every day when everybody's watching?
We'll
I'd say,
get Trump hotels in here.
Exactly. And it isn't that. And people say, "Oh, gee, Scott, you're heartless. You don't care about domestic violence." I think domestic violence is hideous.
Yep.
I'm saying, why don't we talk about why was Joe Mixon, when you've seen that video, which is horrific, and to me the Joe Mixon problem goes beyond that, because that was in 14, and then in 16, the event he had in 16, where he has got a parking ticket, and it was a woman parking attendant, and he went up and he ripped up his ticket and threw it in her face.
Yep.
And then stepped toward her in a threatening manner. Now, he never touched her, but that's almost the exact, that's him exhibiting his...
He's got a big pattern with
and
from
that's
anger.
Yes. And so to me, if I'm from the Vikings perspective, because to me the issue of domestic violence isn't for the Vikings to fix. That is for society to fix, and hopefully it's getting better at it, is I would be concerned with spending a second-round pick on a guy that might be suspended. Now, that's a legitimate concern, because now you spent money and a pick on a guy that may not be available to play.
But do you think societies are policing it in a roundabout way where fan outrage leads to sponsors getting squeamish leads to owners / the league making decisions?
No, I do think that the fact the NFL is such a high-profile business, that the fact that they take these stands probably has a positive impact. I will agree with that.
Yeah. Now, oh, God, I just really hope Joe Mixon's off the board at 48, because I don't want the Wilfs to have to make another moral decision on a scumbag Oklahoma running back.
Yeah, well, I've already talked about it on my show, and I'd said, look, I'm not a scout. I don't pretend to be. I don't watch hardly any college football. I hate that sport. But that's another thing I could talk about, Rob, is the whole NCAA. It makes my stomach turn as the most evil organization in all of sports, but except for maybe FIFA. But I think NCAA is even worse. But people that seem to know Joe Mixon and stuff I've read about Joe Mixon, he is the perfect guy for this team. He's a first-round talent. They don't have a first-round pick. He's a good runner. He's a good blocker. He's a good passer. He's not Adrian Peterson, too, even though he's from the same school. He's the perfect guy at a position where they need that guy. People say running backs aren't as important. I think on this team it's really important to have a running back that can catch a lot of passes given their offensive line problems and inability to run, and not a particularly great group of receivers. So he's the perfect guy. So to me, the Vikings have to make a decision. Are you never going to hire a player who has a domestic violence issue? If that's your position, that's fine. Again, you have to understand what I'm saying is, I have no problem with an individual team saying, I don't want to hire a football player who hit a woman in the face. That's the Vikings' choice. I don't like the league saying that nobody can hire him. That's my difference. I don't think the league should tell. It should be up to the individual teams. So but to me, I think the Vikings have already made that choice. Why else were they down at his pro day?
Samaj Perine.
Okay, so if there was another player there.
Fingers crossed. I swear.
But my point is, and that could be true.
And
then, obviously Oklahoma's going to have a number of players that are drafted. So, but then you see the famous picture of Zimmer talking to Mixon. Now, maybe the Vikings have no interest in him. They went down to see those other players, and then Zimmer just said, hey, how you doing? Maybe he knows him or they know a common guy. So maybe we're reading more into that. But to me, the decision is, are we going to never take players that are – and if your decision is we never are, then Joe Mixon could come up to you and say, I'll pay you $1 million to let me play for you, and you say no. But if your decision is no, we will take those players, then they should take them.
Maybe I give Zimmer and Spielman too much credit for being like Machiavellian geniuses, but say they're really in on Perine, who's probably a third or fourth.
What is he?
Talent.
What position is he? A receiver?
No, running back.
Okay.
With Mixon, he's much more of a bowling ball, straight ahead, sort of plotting goal line power running back. He's not as dynamic, well-rounded as Mixon, although he is a decent receiver and blocker. But I digress. And if they went down there, they were going to interview Perine anyways, and then all of a sudden, like, hey, let's talk to Joe Mixon as a feint to drum up like teams above them, the 47 picks above them. Is like, hey, Vikings interested in Joe Mixon, we better take him, all because we don't want to be forced with that decision.
That could be. Are they? I know that kind of subterfuge wouldn't surprise me at all. I don't think it would.
It bugs me because Mixon obviously is talented, is obviously the modern style of running back, but there's a lot of really great running backs in this draft. And, the Vikings do have needs at other spots, especially offensive line, now cornerback suddenly. And, spending a second-round pick, number 48 overall, on this problem child when you can address other needs, get a running back with similar skills, third or fourth round.
Now, Matthew Collar says that Joe Mixon's pro day was so good that no way Mixon will be available at 48.
Which would be phenomenal.
Yeah, we'll see.
Now, the best thing to do would if he went to the Packers. Maybe not on the field, but just like karmically wise.
I guess that, I am so frustrated with the NFL thinking that suspending a player for 6 games somehow has some impact on domestic violence, that it's such a cheap it's such a cheap and to me PR it almost makes me sick the way they do that. And we've seen how they botch it with Josh Brown. We've seen how they botch it. Look, I'm a lawyer and I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I see it. But before you convict somebody of something, there's a reason we have this long process. It's a little more complicated. It is like the Republicans who hated Obamacare and then looked at it and go, whoa, it's a little more complicated than we thought. Taking away somebody's rights for some action is more complicated and beyond the NFL's ability to do it. They're incompetent at it. It's a false gesture. It's a waste of everybody's time, and it's created negative publicity for the league in a way that the other leagues don't have it. You didn't see near the outrage when Aroldis Chapman went to the Cubs. Few columns here or there. The NFL has made it an issue, and it's hurt their league. It was a bad business decision, and it's weak PR. I hate it.
So you'd rather that they did nothing?
I did nothing.
Yeah.
If you're available, leave it up to the teams. We're not anybody's police here. You're eligible. You ain't in jail. You're eligible to play.
I do think it would have been better that it's like a big government, small government thing. Let the teams decide things. Like when Aaron Hernandez, this is obviously apples and oranges, but as soon as he got a whiff of legal trouble, cut.
Yeah,
you can
do that, you can do that.
Yep.
And you can. I have no. As long as obviously you have a contractual relationship, and that contract's going to say whether you can cut. But most NFL contracts, we know you cut them and they keep some money. If you want to fire a guy for any reason you want, as long as it's within the bounds of the contract and they get, go ahead. That's your prerogative as an employer, 100%. So if the Vikings came out and said we're never going to hire a domestic abuser, fine. But then I tell the fans, when you want to fire Rick Spielman because they don't have a running back, well, he's been hamstrung like other teams haven't. So then take that into account. But people forget that then.
I'm kind of surprised that teams haven't come out and done the very easy PR things. Like, if you commit domestic violence, you'll never be on our team. Like, Harbaugh has done that in recent memory with 49ers. Like, if you put your hands on a woman, you're off my team, da-da-da. He did have quasi that power at the time. But I feel like teams haven't done that to score some easy PR points, and also
the reason they don't do it is they don't want to be in that position of having to get rid of players that they need. Let's say Tom Brady all of a sudden punches Giselle. What are they going to do then? Now, he's old now, but let's say he did that 5 years ago. Now, that gets beyond our construct that some rich white guy would do it, right? But believe me, Josh Brown's a rich white guy, and he did it. It can go beyond race, okay? But I think race has a lot to do with it. But now Tom Brady, don't you think it could be looked at differently if Tom Brady punched a woman in the face than if Joe Mixon did?
Yeah, but teams haven't come out and done that because they could be in positions like, so we got the number 1 overall pick, and there's a very clear, talented franchise quarterback who punches a girlfriend in the face. We're going to be hypocrites.
Yeah, exactly. That's why they don't want to put themselves in a box.
Now, putting yourself in the box, and we've been talking about like possible league collusion. What's your thoughts on Kaepernick?
Well, I think it's, again, same thing, that teams can hire who they want and not hire who they want for whatever reason they want. And that's in our society. We have statutes that say you can't discriminate against people because of race, because of, in some places, sexual orientation, because of ethnicity, and some other things. But otherwise, if I want to fire you because I don't want someone that works for me that's long hair, and obviously, look, I think there's a possibility. I would put it this way: there's certainly a lot of teams that don't want to put up with a guy who took a political stance. And I think that. And they have every right to do that. I find it sad. I find it really sad, and I find it really sad that that now I see one of the Olympic teams, or is it the U.S. national hockey team, or said, if you don't stand on the sidelines, you can't play for our team.
That might be soccer.
It might be soccer, and Rapinoe. But that's not. People want to make a big deal about it. And I'm just saying that happens for a lot of employers. It's a lot of employers don't want their employees taking political stances. And in Kaepernick's case, he took it during his job. So I respect Kaepernick for taking it. I like people. But when you take a stance, when I go out and block I-94 like those protesters did, you've broken the law. Okay, and that's part of why you do it, to get attention for your cause. But then you're going to have to pay the consequences. I have no problem if you shut down a highway and they gather them up and say, you know what, you broke a law when you shut down a highway, we're going to punish you for that. You should. The old Martin Luther King days when they'd have the sit-ins, they knew they were breaking the law, and when they got arrested, they held their hands out there. By arresting us for something we think we should have a right to do, we're exposing what a horrible thing you're doing. So, Colin Kaepernick used his job as a way to make a statement. The fact that some people, and I respect that he did it. But I also respect employers for saying, I don't want you to use your job, your time on the job, to stand up for your political position. Now, if Kaepernick had done it away from the job, would he still be shunned? Probably. But he did it while he was working.
Two questions with Kaepernick. One, if it had been the other side, when something like this happens, especially politically, I always put the shoe on the other foot. Like if Kaepernick had been a huge Trump supporter, wore a MAGA hat, in post locker room interviews, would it be still the same issue, or does it conveniently fit the narrative of you have 32 owners, most of them are, actually all of them are white, rich, probably leaning conservative, and now they're a cabal conspiring against this young black man speaking out about the current culture.
Right. Well, no, so in a legal term, that is called content-based. Content-based discrimination. That is a huge issue in First Amendment rights, where I've always said that if you have a publicly owned stadium, like U.S. Bank Stadium is a publicly funded stadium, and somebody holds up a sign and they say, I hate Mike Zimmer, and they say you got to take that sign down, but the guy next to me has a sign that says, I love Mike Zimmer, you can keep that up. That is a constitutional violation if the government is the one imposing, and I've always said that in a stadium that's owned by the government, they shouldn't be able to have a content-based discrimination on your content.
And all those damn homeless people in there.
Yeah, you either say signs or no signs. So what you're saying is it content-based? In other words, they'll allow people, their employees, to use their workplace to make statements so long as those statements support the owner's political beliefs. Do I think that's going on? Sure I do. But you know what? They got a right to do it. I mean, they're not the government. They can come in and say to you, if you're going to take political positions this way and get rid of you. Now, my bigger question is that good business? To me, just like the criminal element, if you're putting together a football team, do you want? Remember John Tortorelli was talking about the hockey team, and he said if some guy doesn't stand for the anthem, he's not playing that game. And I'm sitting there going, isn't your job as coach to win games? Are you the guy to sit here and judge political? Now you're not going to play players based on their political views? Really? Isn't your job to play the best players to win the game? To me as a fan, I would be upset that my team is making its decisions based on political statements. Yes, that would bother me. Does the owner have the right to do it? Sure he does. But as a fan of that team that says your job is to put a good team on the field and you're not going to sign a guy because you don't like his political stand, that would bother me as a fan. But do they have a right to do it? They have every right not to hire Colin Kaepernick if they don't want to.
Secondly, from Kaepernick's point of view, I actually think he's in a perfect situation because is he a fringe starter? I think he's probably a top 32 quarterback in the league, sure.
Yeah, I think he probably is. Although I haven't seen him play much lately, so I don't know.
Like, here's my thing. If I'm him and his agent, I'm going to go out and demand low-level starter money. I'm not going to settle for the bargain basement contracts that Sanchez and Geno Smith and E.J. Manuel have gone out and signed. No. You know why? Because the longer I stay unemployed, the louder my message gets, the more larger of a martyr I become for my cause, and then all of a sudden I'm springboarded for a second career as an activist. Now, it may be not as opportunistic as it, but I think there's a big reason why he donated $50,000 to Meals on Wheels as it's being defunded by the federal government, and just make that one known. Get that one out there.
And I think you're right. I mean, I think a lot of this has to do with...
It's all a game.
It is, and it's still early. And the funny thing is, the more amazing thing is in free agency, how few players have signed and how little money has been spent. I don't understand that. Is that normal? for this time of year to have so few guys sign?
Is
it because the draft was pushed back? I mean, I don't know what it is.
It's part of the draft
because that was last year though too. It was pushed back last year.
Teams wanted to see if they can fill in their holes with some cheap young labor, and then there'll be a second wave for agency. But it's funny. It's the middle class of the NFL, just like the America, is eroding. Like you have the haves and the have-nots at all these positions. It's pretty. I kind of like it as a free market guy. Like I like players going on betting on themselves, getting a huge free agency contract, and also see it from the side of the team, especially in a salary cap league. Hey, you got to fill up the rest of these spots, and if you get a guy on a cheap deal, incentive-based deal, not a lot guaranteed, that's good for the team.
By the way, another great article that I read years ago that says especially the NFL draft, but the NBA draft too, that the owners, that those drafts cost them a lot of money, that they'd be far better off just getting rid of the draft. Completely have no draft.
Yep.
So now you have all these NFL players, and it's a free-for-all. Go sign who you want.
How it used to be.
And the real star player, every year there's, Andrew Luck, but he's already getting paid a fortune, although now it's come down under the new deal.
Yep.
But how about like Sharif Floyd when he was the number one pick for the Vikings, right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, do you think there's going to be a frenzy over Sharif Floyd? There'll be some interest, but when he's your first-round pick, and now, you've got to pay him because you've put this stamp on him, which most fans wouldn't have known who Sharif Floyd was before they got him. You would. I don't know anybody, I mean, Latavius Murray, I never heard of him. I know he played. I mean, believe me,
he was a hell of a Caesar, Latavius.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not a it was funny. Somebody said to me once, well, you have to watch a lot of sports because you do this. I said, you'd be surprised how few sports I watch, really. My wife would say otherwise. But one of the things Colin Cowherd said once years ago, he said, as you get older, you have to trim your sports-watching tree. That is very true.
Yeah.
I only have to watch, Timberwolves I'm unfortunately obsessed with. But other than that, not so much.
You're not upset that you don't have to watch Fort Myers games in spring and where...
No. Spring training was
It's a split squad and traveling team. Blah.
Well, it is. I've always said... and I've talked to Phil Miller when he's on my show. I love Phil, great writer. I've always said people that pay attention to spring training are stupider than people that never watch it. And I said, Phil, I don't mean that as an insult to you because it's your job. You have to go down and write stories. But if you recall, the Twins had a really good spring last year.
Yeah.
And I remember Blackburn, Nick Blackburn.
Yeah.
He had his best spring ever, and he was out of baseball 2 months later. So what goes on in spring training makes you dumber because not only does it the stuff that goes on in spring training that we can read about is irrelevant to what happens when they start playing.
Did you see Barrio struck out some dude who's going to be working at Midas next week? It was great. All right, Scott, I've had you for a long time, but I want to get to two more questions, and then we'll get you out of here. You mentioned that you had contact with Le Batard, like Le Batard the Younger.
Le Batard the Younger.
The day.
Back in my sports writing days, when I worked at the Fort Myers News Press, we covered a lot of Miami Dolphins, Miami Hurricanes, and Le Batard was working at the University of Miami paper. Yeah. And I was then probably like 25, 26. Le Batard was like 20. And he would hang with us 25-year-olds, and we would hang with some of the olders in the Florida. One of the great things about being a sports writer in Florida, there were so many daily papers. There were like 13 daily papers that traveled with the Dolphins, with Florida Gators, with Florida State. So when we were on the road, it was like a fraternity party, man. And there were some women writers, too, and we had great road trips.
That's back when like the Gators and the U were both good.
Yes. U and the Gators at Florida State were great. It was those, and when Florida played Florida State, it was like a sports writing convention at a Gainesville bar. Mm-hmm. And Dan, so many of these guys. So Le Batard, when it was the Hurricanes, he would hang with us.
Yep.
And we all kind of let him hang around because he was a funny guy, and we could see he was a talented guy. And now he's really, now I really have learned a lot from Le Batard because he looks at sports in a different way. An example, everybody's losing their mind over LeVar Ball, right? And he's on with it, and everyone says this is terrible. And Le Batard is going, this is the greatest thing ever. You got this guy acting like a complete clown. This is what we want. This is great entertainment. Le Batard will always take the contrarian position. I learned that from Patrick Royce, too. And I don't take a contrarian position, and neither does Le Batard, just to be contrarian.
Yep.
what you do is when everybody's thinking one way, take some time and think if there's some reasonable way to think of it another way. And oftentimes you'll realize that makes more sense in a lot of ways. And LeBatard is really good at that.
And he inspires me because it's like, oh, yeah, a husky guy can make it in this world.
He does. Yeah. And he's also very he has a very thick skin. He doesn't take things personally.
Yep.
And, it is funny. I think so many media members, not radio, but some radio people too, like to dish it.
Yep.
Don't like to take it. I remember last year at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which Trump isn't going to this year, which is too bad. One of my favorite events ever.
Yep.
And it always happens on a Saturday night, so I would always talk about it on my Sunday show. But last year when Obama was talking about it, he says, I want to talk about all the reporters that used to cover me that left. And he says, you went there and you went there. And he goes, Jake Tapper. He goes,
oh, yeah.
he goes, some of my reporters even left journalism. Like, for example, Jake Tapper went to CNN. That was a great line. And they showed Jake Tapper, who I love. I think Jake Tapper's really good at his job. And Jake Tapper looked so mad. And I'm thinking, how can you dish it out every day, Jake, and then not take it when it comes back?
Did he look more or less mad than when Obama was roasting Trump at the Correspondents' Dinner like 3 years ago?
He looked about the same. He did. Exactly. See, Trump does. Politics aside, somebody that can't laugh at themselves is somebody that I don't trust. And Trump is one of those guys. Will never make fun of himself.
I laugh at myself all the time.
So do I.
Yeah. All right. Last but not least, you've been through the ins and outs of the radio industry. Like, what's some advice you would give to someone trying to break into the industry currently?
I would give the best advice that I ever got, which was from Steve Conrad, who got me started at 1500. No, he once told me, he said there at that time, he goes, the three greatest radio, and this was in the mid-90s, three greatest radio personalities at that time. Rush Limbaugh, Howard Stern, Dr. Laura. Dr. Laura did this, and he said, and he goes, you could not have three more different shows. Howard Stern is talking about orgasms, Rush Limbaugh is talking about conservative politics, and Dr. Laura had people call up and she would tell them, she would have these super conservative values about how you should live your life.
Oh, I was confusing her with Dr. Ruth.
No, Dr. Laura.
Okay.
And it was Dr. Laura. And he said, those three are the same. That's what he mean. He goes, they know what interests them, and they know why it interests them. Know what interests you, and know why it interests you, and talk about it, and trust yourself, and that it interests you. So that, and I have taken that to where, people feel like, for example, Scott, you have to talk about the NFL draft. I go, the NFL draft doesn't interest me. It doesn't, and I'm not going to make it interest me. And you know what? I got nothing to bring into it. So sometimes when the Vikings draft, what interests me about the draft is all the hype of the draft. So what I like to do when the draft gets close is on my show maybe one day, I'll go back and talk about past drafts. To me, I like to look at other drafts, see what people said and how they turned out, and talk about past drafts. That's what interests me, because I'm not that interested, because I think what goes on during the draft is just a bunch of crap. I mean, it's not crap. It's important for the league, but I can't be that obsessed by it. Okay, I just can't. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't. But if the draft interests you, you should talk about it. You shouldn't do my show. You should do your show. And to me, that's what to me, anybody that wants to get into radio, go watch the Howard Stern movie. If you've never seen it, you got to go see it, where Howard Stern plays himself.
Yeah.
And he did what interests him, and they kept trying to kick him off and kick him off and kick him off, and look at him now. Do what interests you and talk about what interests you.
Thank God I don't have to talk about hockey anymore. That's such a weight off my shoulders. Man. Oh, also watch Howard Stern's movie Private Parts. The scene with the lady and the subwoofer. It's fantastic.
That is a true story that got his, when they locked the doors, that was it, where they said, don't do it. He did it. And it was, and you know what? If you talk about what interests you and nobody listens to you, then you just might not be good enough to be on the radio. I'm not saying that it will. Yeah. I'm saying, but that's the only way it will work.
The Tacos podcast coming soon it's coming up. Scott, time has flown by. Really appreciate you coming in. And
Andrew, thanks very much.
He's Scott Korzenowski.
Perfect.
Bam. At scorzo60 on the Twitter. Sunday Sports Talk, 1500 ESPN. Tune it in, man. Scott, appreciate you.
Thanks, Andrew.
And loving having Scott Korzenkowski and Korzo for the win. Really appreciate him coming in and talking. And, hey, really appreciate you checking out our Amazon. Bullshow.co/Amazon. Redirect right to the homepage. Bookmark it. Every time you buy something, use that bookmark, and we'll get a couple nickels in our pocket. We'll keep on clanking along. That's what we do here at Bull. Show's available on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and like I said, check out our Facebook page. Hit up that Josh Gordon video. It's good stuff. If you enjoy the friend, tell a friend, spread the word, add to the Jerome Homie Army. Scott Jerome Korzenowski is bam. And thanks, producer Allie, for making me not sound so stupid today. But for Scott, I'm Andy Carlson saying Annyeong, sayonara, and bye-bye. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to Bull with Andy Carlson, Minnesota's 87th best daily podcast. Download the show on iTunes. Everyone's middle name is Jerome.